As each people came into being, they were put on a land that looks like them, and given a language that sounds like that land, describes that land in relationship to all those things. As each thing came into being, it was given its own ceremony. So that's how we know our relatives. And when we know all those things, we know how to do our ceremonies to keep the balance between those things.
We were just asked if we wouldn't mind doing the land acknowledgement, because we're both Musqueam ladies here. Slane. And I said, I've never done like a tag team land acknowledgement before.
Okay.
So just see how this goes down, right? Maybe you do one.
Sure. I'll do some hunkaminam and then maybe we can improv.
Yeah, let's do that. That's what I was hoping.
ACM nisiaya tikum quinamta paita ka nisiam nisiaya. Anta chachlia telitan atla komakuyam at tamat. Tana shwala kwa Quelemia telitan atla komakuyam at tamat. Tachacha komakuyam at tamat. So na 10th with all the mat, with on the man at that some fancy set no smarten, with on a shield mamana. 8 ton squalluin, ton a snet. Telitan atla chayabalano, schwalaka, eaten quell hunkaminum kun, knee high ton a squells quilitamakan. Good evening, my honored and respected friends. My name is Quelemia. My English name is Christie Charles, and I come from this sacred Musqueam land where we are today. Along with my family here from Musqueam, Quelemia. I'll get you to introduce yourself, but I just wanted to share a little bit of who I am. That's our traditional protocol from our Musqueam teachings, is that we stand up and we say who we are and where we're from. Because our ancestors planted those seeds, and then down the line, when we're at gatherings like this, our traditional gatherings like this with other people who've come from the different communities, like the storytelling nights, when we stand up and we say that people know who we are. They can connect our ancestors, our language. My name specifically brings me to this place. It doesn't mean like spotted feather or little deer or something. It means Quelemia. It means I come from this place right here. The ancestors before me carried it. The women in my family before me carried it, and my children, my daughters, in the future, my granddaughters will carry it then. So that's just a part of our traditional protocol. Do you want to
Sure.
intro yourself?
Antha Quelemia Sparrow, Eaton Musqueam, Skleets, Tshlimuth Musqueam Matsteoch, Midsep Twilam. Welcome everyone, welcome. I just said briefly a little bit, like welcome into the space or into the longhouse. My name is Quelemia Sparrow, and I said that I'm from Musqueam Nation. Quelemia, this is the thing too, so like Christie said, our protocol is to introduce ourselves and to share our lineage and our family. And Quelemia was given to me by my grandmother, Rose, who married into the Musqueam family. My grandfather, Ed Sparrow, is from Musqueam, and my grandmother was from upriver in the Chilliwack-Stolo region, and so that is where my name is from. And like Christie said, whenever it doesn't mean spotted fawn, although that's a gorgeous name. It's very specific. People always ask me, well, what does your name mean? And I say, well, this is the way that we do things on the land, and the protocol is that we know, as soon as you hear the name Quelemia, you would know what family that was from, what region it was from, how all of a sudden I'm in Musqueam, and then I have relatives in the Stolo Nation, and we had a very detailed, intricate way of keeping track of our lineage and our family and the land. So that's a brief introduction of who I am here.
One of the things that we do now throughout the city, throughout the country, is we do these land acknowledgements or territorial acknowledgements, and if you're not an Indigenous person from the land, you do that respectful thing of saying, oh, we work, play, and live on the unceded territory of the people, right? That's the thing we do. But to go back even further, when I said I come from Capilano, I'm sure you've seen that name, Capilano Suspension Bridge, Capilano University. That name directly comes from the Musqueam people. And through marriage, intermarriage, traveling across the land, the name has traveled. But there are still families. My aunt carries the female version of that name within my family. My nephews carry the male version of Capilano. But see, there's different generations of Capilano, and one of them was this great warrior who stopped Simon Fraser from coming down the river. Turned him back and said, hey, you can't come here, sorry. But first he was like, well, what do you got, right? So that's our protocol, right? We don't just, say, hey, welcome, hey, thanks for coming, yeah, come on in. We have different checkpoints around the land, right? There's different places around the city of Vancouver and surrounding areas where we would have sacred spaces for our gathering, for ceremonies, for our warriors to be on guard. And I just found out that our warriors were so fierce that they used to swing from the trees and come out from the water. They're pretty amazing. But they'd ask you questions, right? So my question is, excuse me, may I ask who you are?
My name is Randle. I'm from the Untitled Nation, and we're here to enjoy the show.
Okay. And may I ask who you are, sir?
My name's Lyle.
Lyle.
I'm your younger brother, and I'm from Musqueam, Bend.
Okay. And how long do you plan on being here for?
For the rest of the show, or?
For sure. I sure like that bracelet you have. Is that a gift you brought to the people of the land? For staying? Okay, thank you. I guess you can stay for a little while.
Oh my God, that's funny.
What do you think?
Yes, so good. Also, it's also that thing too, and you're like, oh, in the Clapmuck. Do you know Kevin Lauren? Sick figuring out who knows who and who's friends with who and who belongs where. Also, in my land acknowledgements, what I've been really excited about is incorporating Canoe Protocol, which is something that Christie's talking about a little bit as well. Two, I feel like, is that when we traveled, our Stotlow, our river, was our highway, and when we traveled along our highways, we did have protocol. If a warrior didn't get you, and you were there for reasons other than war, there was protocol where as you approached, you would state your intention. Are you here to feast? Are you here for negotiations? Or what is the reason for being here? Are you here for, we also had lots of protocols and agreements over our villages in general as well too, like summer and winter fishing and hunting villages where we did have these really important agreements between the nations. Who is going to be fishing or hunting at a certain time or at a certain village at a certain time, and that's why right now it became a big old mess for a while because that system was broken and we didn't have fences or delineations. It was actually a lot more complex than that. And so going back to this, you arrive in your canoe, you state your intention, and then we decide whether you're going to come on that land, and then there's the feast, it's time to feast and have fun, and to enjoy time together. So I like to really ground myself in the Canoe Protocol, because I don't know, it's been about a decade now since I've been doing land acknowledgements. It sort of started in 2010 during the Winter Olympics. But for myself, I've had to really wrap my own head and heart around what this is that I'm doing and the reasons behind it, and for myself, for it to be grounded in protocol and our culture, because I feel like even the white people were like, oh, we gotta do this thing. You want to just get up and just state, nobody knew what was going on, and so
They don't take the time to pronounce the names properly.
yeah, so it was a lot of time, I think, of really being able to ground ourselves in our own sovereign being, of being wait a minute, what's happening here? How do we really want to approach this? So this just briefly.
Yeah,
That's
that's
acknowledgements,
a little gist of it. Yeah. And
so welcome.
welcome. Yeah. I was just gonna say one of the things, because of COVID, I can't go into the audience, but one of the final things that I like to do is I like to say, hey, I really like your jacket. I'm gonna take your jacket. And I like that necklace you're wearing. Thank you. Thank you. I acknowledge that those used to be yours.
Good evening and welcome, and thank you for those words. That's beautiful, and it's really beautiful to sit up here with the both of you, two women in the community that I admire a lot in your work and who you are. I'm sitting between two famous people. It's awesome. My name is Kim Haxton, and I am a guest here. I'm Potawatomi. I'm from a place called Musqueam. I'm from a small island on the Great Lakes. And I've been transplanted out into this part of the territories for 15 years. I thought I was coming here for 2 years, and it's been this long. Rosemary always is like, hey, Kim, come on, let's do this. And I'm like, what? Okay. And I always keep on weaving in and out of with Quelemia, and it's always a joy. And recently we've been, weaving in, and our circles are getting closer and closer, and it's amazing. And so tonight, we've been talking about, we've been wandering. That's part of storytelling, is that there's a lot of wandering. It's not about a straight line, it's about circles. And last night we went through 70,000 years of history by one of our storytellers, and it was kind of amazing. And each night, and each person brings in, and you've been here, I know there's a few people that have been here each night. It's been really open to where the stories go. But I like to anchor it in, and it's funny because I'm like, well, I guess I'm going to throw out the one, who are you? And bringing yourself here because you just arrived, and I just really want to acknowledge that, which I think is really beautiful. But my question, I think, would be is I'm just going to start with, I think, the last part, which is what's the gift that you carry from your ancestors? And I don't know who wants to go first. No pressure.
You want me to go?
I'm like the trained actor, so it's I'm I could speak publicly right away if you want me to. AKA Ham. So
What's the gift from your ancestor?
Okay, so I already began to share that. My biggest gift is my name. Like I said, my grandmother gave me my name in ceremony when I was around 7, and it was such a beautiful process. Even everything, like preparing for the ceremony and those memories, and being so little and still like, like making the earrings for the giveaways and, preparing everything with the aunties and the cousins and just the grounding. Oh my gosh, I didn't know I was going to get emotional right away. The grounding that gave me at such a young age stayed with me my whole life, and that I was really fortunate to be around elders, my grandparents, when I was little. My grandfather, Ed Sparrow, was born in 1898, and he was almost 100 when he passed on. And and my dad is the youngest of the brothers and sisters, and so we were the babies. Is the baby of the family, and then we're his little babies. So we were sort of inseparable from Granny and Grandpa, and we lived right next door to them. And my other gift that I received gifts from both of them, but my grandmother, and we'll get into this probably a little bit more because I feel like it kind of crosses over into other questions that I think you might have, that my granny used to tell me stories when I was little too, and we would sit. I remember sitting in the kitchen on the linoleum floor with Chris and Aaron and my sister Laura, listening to my granny telling us stories. And what's been incredible is growing up and carrying those stories and then being able to cross-reference, like I've done a lot of research since then, and like even when you and I get together, we talk and we share stories and we figure things out, and then something will click. And I'll be like, oh, I remember my granny talking about Salithke, and like remembering the story, but then when I'm older, I'm like, oh, that's what it was called, because I just didn't quite remember the name, but the story so well in your body. So that's what I would say was the gift from now. They are my ancestors from my granny and grandpa. And my grandpa was more like a historian, so he had so much knowledge where people would just sit around and everyone would come from UBC to record him, and everyone would be like, shh, Grandpa's speaking. and so much like videotapes, audio tapes, where we kept track of everything, like the place names and the stories of the land and all of that, that he gifted to us, the family, and then, in turn, like all of you in the end, and everybody, that our family is huge too, I might add. So everyone has a piece of that or a version of that they're sharing with the world. So I'm really grateful for my granny and grandpa.
Thank you. What is your gift?
Trained to be a speaker in the house.
Yeah, you don't need a microphone.
I don't need a microphone. We never used these things before.
It's just for a recording.
I know. I'm just my gift. So again, I've had the honor to be able to sit with elders and people in our community from before, who are our ancestors now, I should say. And then just growing up, like, within the community, and just learning about who I am, like not learning about who Christie is, but learning about who Quelemia is, and learning, about who our families are and how we're connected to the land and the language and the water and the animals and everything, right? Not Natsamatst, everything is one. But also learning about what your gift is, right? Like, within our communities, within our societies, each person has a role. We hear about like the hunters and the gatherers and the berry pickers, But there's people who have different roles, right? Like the storytellers, the ones who take care of our spirits, the ones who take care of the special kinds of medicines that we don't know about. And what is it called? Disclaimer. All of this information I'm sharing is the intellectual property of my people, so it doesn't go past me. Unless we're sitting and we're training and we're learning and we're part of the family kind of thing. Anyways, I could go on and on and on. But that's, each person has a gift. And through colonization and residential school and that kill the Indian within the child writing, that's the part that was never taken away, was our gift, right? Through the crazy things that happened all across our history, they never killed the Indian within us. So that's one thing that I always try to share and to talk about is find our gift. You know, we're so connected to the universe and to the stars and to our ancestors, and, you know, they left these seeds for us, is that, you know, when we put it out there, that is our gift, is to connect to who we are. You know, get out on the land, like the land. You know, that's why it's so hard, you know, resource extraction and all that kind of wonderful stuff. It's actually keeping us sick, right? Keeping our indigenous people sick because they're taking away our land. But our land is our magic. It's what keeps us so strong. I've been through so much grief and trauma, and you wouldn't tell because I'm like, hey, I'm Miss Christie Lee. How's it going, everybody? Right? But it's because I can turn to the land. I can go, you know, to the Musqueam River, not the Fraser River. I can go to the Musqueam River, and I can sit there, and I can sit with the otters and the eagles, and you know, and you know, see the salmon and the I want to say hunkaminum, the seals and stuff come by, right? Or I can go across to North Van. I can go to the mountain, and I can go up in the water, and I can take a fresh bath. And it can rejuvenate me and re-energize me. Those are my gifts, right? Being an indigenous person of this land is the best gift that I could ever have. And to teach my children that that's the gift that they have, you know, but without being disturbed in a public park. Like, hey, sorry, we're picking berries. Could you not come up and pick in our berry patch while I'm trying to pass on tradition? And could you not take pictures of us? Like, you know, because a lot of the public spaces and public parks and beaches are our traditional sacred lands, right? So looks like I'm out there just, you know, spending time with my family like everybody else is enjoying the park. But no, I'm really just passing down tradition and passing down these gifts. But also the transformation of who we are and different phases in our lifetime. Like we have specific ceremonies that not everybody just belongs to, that some people within our community can only be born into, and it's within those ceremonies that we transition to the next stage of our life, and then we understand our gift as that person and who we are. Like right now, I'm starting to tap into my gift of really understanding the connection to like the universe, and listening to the messages, you know, listening to like, why is that bird yelling at me? You know, it's those little things like we think it's silly, but it's really, that's how connected our ancestors are. You know, we're so connected. When we look at every other, you know, cultural practice across the world, you know, even when we look at yoga and, you know, connecting to our chakras and stuff like that. It's so sacred, right? People follow those practices like step by step and move by move. That's exactly how we are with our traditional practices, right? That's our gift of learning who we are and, starting to really stand up and use my voice. That's what I'm finding right now. During this pandemic, I've sat on a couple Zoom panels or discussions, and being a part of this pandemic, it's really made me realize, like, I've been able to connect even deeper than I was before because my mind's not as busy. I'm at home re-energizing and refocusing. And then I'm a little bit of that angry Indian now. I realize, you know, like, some of these things that happen in our life happen to us in order for us to realize the next stage or the next process as to why things are happening. Like, say, for example, in the summertime, the city of Vancouver let people drink in the park. But at the same time, there was like a Black Lives Matter and Indigenous Lives Matter like gathering. And I'm like, oh, these guys are over here drinking away, talking smack about us over here, and we have to be the bigger people and not be like, excuse me, could you not do that here? Because if we be really polite to them, they're going to take it the wrong way, and it's going to cause a whole new issue, right? So it's like these little things that you kind of have to sit back and be like, oh, this is a teaching. This is a gift. This is opening my eyes to see what else needs to be taken care of next, right? So it's an ongoing, flowing process like the river. Yeah.
Thank you.
Heichka.
I think you said a lot of things there, and I always say this. I'm going to do this every night. I said this to Rosemary. I'm going to do this at the beginning of the night, but I want to bring light to people's struggle, and the fights that are happening, or the defending, not fights, of people from the Mi'kmaq to New Caledonia, the Haudenosaunee people, to the Wet'suwet'en and the Secwepemc people, and the work that our other relatives are doing out on the land, and for the sanctity of ancestors that aren't here yet, that are coming, and I really want to honor that. I want to honor all of the places in which we know as Indigenous stewards, there are protocols on how we take care of our communities, with looking at Black Lives Matter, and as their guests we have governance protocols on taking care of our visitors, right? And when we see other people being hurt, it's part of the work that happens ongoing, right? And I think I just want to naming the ongoing trauma that happens that people don't see is a really important piece. And I think one of the medicines, we've got medicines, right? We've got medicines all around us to deal with it. And I just want to acknowledge that as we start going into the next part, which is we have singing, dancing, storytelling, prayers, ceremonies, and connection to the land, which you named, you've both named them. And I think those, and humor, right? I think we laugh a lot.
Yeah, like this something else meme.
Like there's something else, we're something else.
Oh my
right?
God, have you seen those something else memes? I like whenever I'm on Facebook, I'm always like, are the white people seeing this too? Like, is this just my feed, or everyone been seeing this something else stuff? Not that everyone's white in the audience, I know. But like, they were hilarious, like taking something else, taking this like dig and this like really disgusting moment and turning it into humor. Like, I just love our people so much for that. Like, those memes were hilarious. Like, for like days now, I've been reading these memes that are just like, this is the transmutation that we're talking about. These are the teachings. This is the spirituality that we bring into the work, is being able to take something like that and transmute it into power, into humor, into love. And like, our people are really friggin' good at that.
So now I'm like, okay, now I've got my next question. Because we talk about power. And I think there's an important piece of understanding where power comes for you. And what is real power? But I also want to start weaving in the cosmology that exists here for you because of your language. And we talked about it at the beginning of the night. Maybe you weren't here. We talked about how English as a dominating language, there's things that can't be translated, that are translated into English, but they aren't necessarily the right translation. So I would love for you to bring us into a story that you've been given, or that is important to you, your own experience of being on the land, being by the water, but of learning a word and where you just realize the English language just doesn't fit it. Maybe. I don't know if it's a question there, but it's a. You were talking about that thing as of learning language.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much there. I mean, I'm sure Christie can speak to this a bit more. You've noticed that she's a bit more fluent than I am. I have been studying the language, but I mean, this is the thing too, this like overlap with everything, right? So my background is that I'm a theater artist and performer and creator. So I write. That translates into lots of different things, lots of different forms, but I mean, my background is playwriting. And then in connection to the traditional ways in teaching and what we call storytelling, right? So when I realized, I feel like I realized I wanted to do that when I was on the linoleum floor when I was little, listening to my granny. I wanted to continue that. And it was this pull and this drive, like when we're talking about like what are our gifts and what has been given to us and what work we're here to do. And that's the work that I'm here to do, is to share those stories and those teachings in many different ways, and then that's storytelling, because these days it just comes in so many different forms and ways. So as far as the language is concerned, like, I mean, when you're like going through theater school and working 16 hours a day, you don't have an opportunity to go then to UBC and study your language. So I want to be really clear and transparent about the labor and the time that it takes for you and I to be up here on the stage talking about this. The amount of hours I have spent at the Vancouver archives, talking, discussing, figuring things out, the amount of time it took for you took a linguist course, essentially with a bunch of linguist folks, experts in language. Like a whole orthography was created so that we could learn our language, It's like this huge, and it's endangered language, like the amount of time and effort that it takes to figure these things out. And every process that I'm in, I have to move beyond that because it's disempowering at times, you know what I mean? When I'm creating something and it's just not at the tips of my fingers, then I have to like pick up the phone and have a meeting with the language department. They're so sick of me at the language department because I call and I'm like, what is the translation to this? Or I have this sentence, God help them if it's like a paragraph or like half of a play. At one point I was like, I want to translate a whole piece of a play. And they were like, what? You can't do that. Like, that's just going to take too much work. So for me, because I don't have it, that I'm not fluent, and we have a handful of people that are actually fluent speakers, it takes a lot of labor. And then like huge discussions. Like a week later, I'll get my sentence back and they'll be like, oh, we decided on the sentence. Because we have to make sure that it's done in the right way and that it's translated properly and that the language department agrees upon it. So it's like a huge amount of labor that goes into this. So, I mean, going back to one of your questions, like, if there was a certain word, there are many different words that hit me where, I mean, just being able to, like, say, introduce myself, even that, like, simple few sentences that I said. I mean, I remember in the language class when I took it the first year, and also the vulnerability around that as well too. Again, you're taking a course with linguistic students and us, and they've done a lot of work since then to make it a lot more comfortable, I believe, for our own people to take to study our own language. That many of us, burst into tears the first time we even said the simplest word. So it's like, for me, it's like not one particular word that sticks out to me in this moment. It's like the ability to even begin to speak it, to even begin to, and especially like my background is like oral storytelling as well too, that like when we, like the difference, like my Niklakmach friends over here, we have very similar words, but like my language sounds like the ocean. Like it sounds like seaweed. It sounds like, like, we say like spaat. And when you say spat or something, it's like hard, like the rocks in the mountains. It's like, and ours is like squishy. Like it just feels like you're like stepping on seaweed and wet sand. Right? And so it's like, it's that thing that hits your whole being where you're like, oh, you're in it. You're in the land when you're speaking the language, spash. Like it sounds like seaweed. So I'll stop there. I know, I'm like, it's a bear seaweed. Spath means bear.
So kind of along the same line.
I totally just did that thing where she was talking about like when like our old people get together and they just kind of play off each other, and I just wanted to start like chiming in. And
So you totally can.
Yeah.
Like let's like get cash with this too. You don't have to be like so formal.
okay, so like language. I'm not too sure what your question is. I'm just gonna go with this.
I'm gonna drop that.
Yeah.
You're freestyling.
Yeah, I'm a freestyle.
And also Christie does hip hop in the language. Like she raps in Hunkaminam. So
That's a whole nother show. Okay, so language. Hunkaminam. So like, oh my gosh, I can go off on this. So when people say, welcome to the unceded lands of the Coast Salish people, or welcome to unceded Coast Salish territory, like when people say that in Vancouver, I'm just like, don't say that. Please don't say that. That's not how it is. Because we're very distinct, very unique. Musqueam. Like we are the people of Vancouver. We've been here for over 10,000 years through archaeological evidence or belongings unearthed from our ancestors, oral histories, and the language that we speak, right? It goes back further than we could ever imagine. So when people say Coast Salish territories or Coast Salish people, that's putting a colonized lens or a colonized blanket term on our people, on our language, because it's when the linguists and the people came and studied our different language families, and within BC there's 51 different language families, and within the Coast Salish territories there's the three Hunkaminam, Hulkamalum, and Hunkamalum language families, but then they blanket termed it Hulkamalum. It's like so confusing, right? So that's where like it kind of gets colonized, right? But our language is very specific and very unique, and even our great-grandparents spoke a different dialect of Hunkaminam. Like it was so different. Even though we're speaking the same, people would be like, oh, that's from a little bit upriver, and that's a little, it's like, it's a hybrid language now, kind of, when you think about it, right? But growing up, we've always had it in our families, right, since time immemorial. But my family was one of the families who worked with the linguists, right? Back in the 50s, they sat with, the different people from the different places, institutions, and they sat there and, like, here, have a drink, here, have some money, tell us some stuff, right? Ripped off. Anyways. Sorry. Told you I've been sitting in this pandemic too long. I'm getting upset. Sorry. But anyways, they would say like, they'd sit and, document our language. And now it's like it belongs to, different institutions, right? Our language belongs to different institutions. Sorry, I got off track there for a second. But anyways, my family, the Charles family, my great granny Christine and my great grandpa Andrew, and then my great papa or my great uncle, Andrew C. Charles, they were the ones who worked with a lot of the linguists and provided a lot of the stories, and along with other families from Musqueam, they're the ones who sat down and provided all this information for not much. But now you can buy like the book for like a couple $100 online. But they sat with them and they shared this knowledge, and I'm thankful for that because I never got to meet my great grandparents, right? But I met them through the language, through passing down, through the stories, right? And I grew up with it. We had it in preschool. We learned, the numbers and the greetings and the animals, and then just growing up, because it was in my family, I got to hear it here and there. But then in high school, I took the language program, and I got to graduate with like university credits and language credits as opposed to French or Spanish.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
That's why you know more than me. Also, I'm a bit older too. I was like, we didn't get that in preschool. That's awesome. I didn't know that.
Good salmon. You don't know how old we are, huh?
I know. I was like, gasp.
We're from the land.
That's awesome. I didn't know that you did that in high school.
Yeah. But at that time, my late papa, Andrew, was, he was awesome. He'd go sit, he didn't take the class, he wasn't registered or anything, he just went and sat there. He just went and sat in the back. Sorry, I got fluffs everywhere. He went and sat in the back to watch, right? To listen, to watch, and to correct.
Oh my God, that's so nerve-wracking.
Right? He'd stand up, he'd be at the back, and he'd stand up, he goes, "You can't say it like that. You guys can't use our language like that." And the instructors would just be like, oh, just shaking their head because they've made this beautiful, wonderful FNLG program, but yet here's this person who speaks the language saying, "You can't say it like that," right? And I never understood it. And then I was with my dad, and I started making music, and I was like, "Dad, how do I say like, how do I express this feeling, or how do I describe something?" And he'd be like, "Oh, you can't say it like that." I'm like, "Why can't I say these things?" It's because our language doesn't translate directly to certain things, right? It doesn't say like, "Oh, look, there's that tree." Like, "Oh, there's a tree." It'll say like something like, "Oh, that beautiful tree that's grounded, that's rooted into the dirt." Or like, we don't just say the sun's hitting the tree. We'll say like the sun is shining, from the west or something. I'm just making stuff up, right? But just to give an example of how descriptive and intimate and how connected our language is. So we can't just say like, when you want to write a play, the language department's like, "Oh, you can't say that." It's because
I know, they're like, "You want me to what?"
It doesn't translate directly.
Translate a play?
Right?
Yeah.
So then when I started making my music, growing up, I grew up with like gangster rap and like, Tupac, Wu-Tang, Lil' Kim, like hardcore. I was like, yeah, right? So that's what I listened to. But then as I was growing up, I had all these wonderful jobs where I got to go sit and do interviews with elders, or, go sit and, clean fish with people in a community, or go make drums or something, right? Our summer jobs are pretty awesome in Musqueam. Sometimes we get to, "Oh, I'm going to be an archaeologist this month," or something, right?
I was always in the research.
Research?
That's me. Like,
right? I was always in the archives.
Department. Yeah, I was always like,
I don't want to go to rec. I want to go to the archives. So I always had these jobs, and then like at the same time I was growing up in this like hip hop world, and I was like putting two and together. I'm like, oh, these things don't match, right? Like, I'm not a gangster. I don't do all this crazy stuff. I'm a Musqueam person, and I'm, after school, we, go from the city down to our community, and we go go start cleaning fish, or we go start preparing for whatever it is, like ceremony that we're going to have that night, right? So, and then I realized, like, oh, hey, I'm one of the older girls in our family, and I'm like, this fascinates me, and I want them to learn too, in a way, right? So how can I pass on these stories? Like, because I was realizing there's this disconnection. So then that's when I got into music, and I started putting, our cultural teachings and our stories and our language into our music. But before I released it, I went into our community and I asked, different people. And the one person I asked was my papa Andrew, who I was talking about. But at the time he was in the hospital, he was just passing of cancer. And he was so serious. Like, you knew my papa Andrew, yeah?
Yeah.
He was like, our old people were so serious, but they're so funny at the same time. But I was so nervous to come bring him my song,
Yeah,
where I'm
bet.
rapping in Hunkaminam, and I put it in this little CD player. See, I'm old. I put it in the CD player, and I press play, and I'm sitting there, and I'm sweating. I'm like, oh my gosh. And he's a Star Trek fan, and he was sitting on his bed, and Star Trek was playing, and he was just he'd look at me, and then he'd look at his show, just stare at his show, and then he'd look at me. And then he'd look outside, and I'm just like, oh my God, what is he thinking? And then the song ends. I'm like, so Papa, what'd you think? He was like, I was like, well, is it okay? Do you think I could do it? He's like, yeah, that's good. And I was like, really? Thank you, Heichka. And he goes, no. And he goes like this. He goes, Heichka. Oh my gosh. So he knew that I was so nervous that he cracked the joke and, broke the silence. So it made me really happy. And then we talked about, he gave me permission to use these cultural teachings in a good way. But then also it's very difficult because the way we pronounce our words is very specific. Like if you mispronounce something, you could say something totally different and completely embarrass yourself, right? So when you're rapping, you have to be very careful. And I did 20 takes of my one verse because it's so hard, and I'm so that protocol is set within me that I have to do it right? Yeah. I'm trained that way to do it right. And one more thing I wanted to say quickly. Sorry, I'm taking over the stage here for a sec. But just about 2 years ago, I had a lady do her final dissertation on my song called Experience. And she wrote her whole paper on my one song because she went in to research Indigenous hip hop, and she couldn't find anybody who really rapped in an endangered language as opposed to an indigenous. There's lots of indigenous language, but more of a endangered language. And then a female. So she couldn't find, and she found me. So she wrote her paper, and then when she went into the research, into the world, she found that a lot of the research done on MCs are based on Anglo-American rappers or African-American rappers, and there really isn't much data out there for women, let alone Indigenous women, let alone Indigenous women who rap in their language. There's zero, So she did this study on my song and compared me to KRS-One and Eminem and Dr. Dre, and talked about how people have their own style, right? When they rap, they'll hit it a certain way, or they'll get grimy, or they'll get, light, but it's still their flow. But she said when she studied my music, when I rap in English, hey, this is me, Miss Christie Lee, I represent Van City. That's my flow. But then when I start rapping in Hunkaminam, it takes on this whole new transformation and this whole new sound. And it's something she hasn't heard before. It's Nasiya, Stetson White, Stammesis, Stetson, I know, Aiten, Squallowing, Quitsneek, Nama. As opposed to, hey, this is me, Miss Christie Lee. It's totally different. But yeah, I never thought of it that before. And then just recently again, I did a show with Peaksik. They're throat singers, right? Phenomenal. But we were doing our sound check and our mics kept glitching or kept stomping out, and then the speakers kept blasting out too. And then the same thing would happen with their music when they would do the sound check. And the guys were like, we don't know what's wrong. I was like, because you guys can't handle this. We're bringing the magic from the ancestors through the vibrations. Like, so that's what we bring. It's a whole different thing.
Beautiful. Thank you. I think it's really important. The first time that I saw Christie Lee was I was walking up the street with another friend of mine who's a hip hop artist, and I heard you, and I was like, I remember my mind being blown, because I'm just like, how is that possible that I'm hearing the language, this language? How much, I was totally just like props off to that, because there is no one else that does that. And what an inspiration for young artists coming up to do that, to learn their own language. So you're both contemporary and modern women, and who can cut fish really well, I suppose. I hope so.
I think we both can.
Right?
Yep.
And which brings me to a question of, you both talked about and referred to the land that gives you strength. You return to the land. And we know that the land also speaks to us. And I think we kind of talked about that before everybody came. You said something about there's a place, I don't remember exactly how you said it, but something about the land, like the river. Because I asked, are you river or ocean? What touches you more? And you said the river. And I remember was it 2 years ago or is it a year ago when you did your play?
Are you talking about Salmon Grove?
Yeah.
That is a very good question. I have no concept of time whatsoever.
Yeah, right?
Quite a few years ago.
Oh, yeah.
Quite a few years ago, it's past. Like maybe
3?
maybe.
Okay. Yeah, I don't. And you spoke about the river there, and I was wondering if you could share a story through time, either through your grandparents, but your experience with the river.
Sure. What Kim is talking about is that a number of years ago, I wrote a kids' play with Michelle Olsen and her company, Raven Spirit. And when she first came to me and said, hey, do you want to write a kids' play? And I've never written a children's play before in my life. And I said, yeah, sure. I mean, okay. And we sat down and talked about what we would actually want to write about. And going back to my work as a writer is super land-based. For me, it's all about reclaiming place names and space and sharing those stories with people, but it's also reinterpreting, reclaiming, revitalizing, sharing traditional story as well, and whatever that's very open as well too. So I said to her, well, okay, well, we're not going to write a story about a bear or an eagle. That was the first thing I said. I was like, oh my God, they get way too much attention. There's not going to be a bear and eagle in this play. And I was like, what about the salmon? Like, there's just we are river people. So Musqueam, we were at the mouth of the Fraser River, and the Halkaminum language, along with the island, is all along the river, all the way up till we get to the mountains, to the mountain people. where the two rivers meet, right? So I said, like, we need the salmon to be the star of the show. And for me, this sort of like pan-indigeneity that happened all through, my lifetime and my, school years, our stories were never highlighted, and the stories that I received, or even when I started to research, were all about like these salmon people, and that were like half salmon, half human, and like nobody was sharing these stories. So I said, we have to write a story about the salmon. And even like that, when we were talking about like what our summer jobs were, like one year I was working in the treaty department, going, and like part of that was sort of like reorganizing a lot of the stories there. And I came across like this one story, and it was like this little picture of a fish like in a little swing, and it was just like this like half human I don't even know what story it was. It was so random, but like somebody had like done this little illustration beside the story of like this little fish like on a swing. And so it was just so adorable, and I just thought back to that little fish on the swing when I was thinking of this kid's play. And so Michelle is from the Trondock. I hope that I'm saying that properly, but she's from up north. In the Yukon, and her people are fish people as well too. And so what we decided to do is sort of like share our fish stories and sort of come up with some main characters of this story. And so this is what's interesting as well too, is like taking our stories. I'm trying to stop saying traditional before everything, because really like they're like our stories, or our Shui Ayams, which are our ancient histories, which are more the teachings, but like they're our stories, like plain and simple. And but in this instance, it was sort of like a hybrid. And then you get into this really complex space where it's like, oh, is this okay? Should I make sure that it's Musqueam-centric? I'm also collaborating with somebody from the Trondock Nation. So it's like we want, her influence in it. And this is what happens when we're living, breathing Indigenous peoples, a Musqueam woman creating. There's no parameters on art. You know what I mean? It's ever evolving and changing and in the now. So it's like this hybrid sort of story came about, and connection to one of the river stories that I've heard about returning the bones to the river. And so there's probably not enough time to sort of get into that story. I have told this story before. What I will say about this, like the difference between storytelling and like the theater world or the writing world that I'm very into, is that this story about the returning the bones into the river, I was asked to tell in the storytelling festival one year. And I'm an actor, like traditionally trained, like went to theater school. And so like I wrote out the whole story, like I knew it, and then was like trying to memorize the story, which is like so stupid, because it's like not the way that we work and we do things. And I got to the point where I was like, oh, I can't do this. I got really nervous, and I was like, I'm going to back out last minute, because like I just can't memorize this story in enough time. And then I had this incredible conversation with some storytellers about what storytelling actually is. That when we tell our stories, it's malleable like this, and it morphs in a way that whatever the audience needs to receive, they receive. So when you tell a story, it's never the same once. depending on where you're at in the moment, depending on where the audience is at, depending on what people react to. So it it changes and it morphs, and what you need to do is you need to remember like the posts, sort of like the places in the story. So what I found really fascinating about actually doing it in practice is that it's situational, that storytelling is in your being and in your body, and that all you need to do is go, okay, I need to get to the place where, the salmon transforms into a human. I know that anchor in the story, and I just need to find my way there. And it is a form that is like, when we're talking about like decolonizing story, I mean, that was the experience for me that was like transcendent, where it was like all of a sudden the story was in me. And it's still in me, and that's why sometimes when you say you want to tell a story, like there's a process where it's like, oh, okay, I have to kind of like wrap my head around how I'm going to share that story, right? Or what the purpose is to share that story. So going back to the river, it ended up being a morphing between Michelle's culture and then the river people here. And it's a story about the cycles of the salmon and the teachings in that of when the salmon go out to the ocean and come back up, and the different breeds of salmon. And there's just a really beautiful way to tell the story where you understand in the teachings of the cycle. And the teaching is that when we eat the salmon, which is our cousin, and in this story it's a little brother, so it's a little boy that that almost drowns because somebody doesn't return the bones properly. So you eat the salmon, and then you lay the bones to the side, and then when you're finished eating, you gather all the bones and you bring them down to the river, and you return the bones to the river. And in this one particular story, when you return the bones to the river, it turned back into the little boy that was from this family. So it's the mother and the family eating the salmon, throwing the bones back, and it transforms into the little boy. But in this one instance, there was a guest, and he kind of knew something was up, and he didn't quite understand what was happening, and he wanted to figure it out. So he took one of the bones and he hid it in his cheek. And when the mother went to gather up the bones to return them to the river, the little boy, the bones tried to transform back into the little boy, and the little boy began to drown, and he was circling around, and he was half, like I said, half human, half fish, but he couldn't swim, and he was neither human nor fish. And the chief, in this particular story, he said, I know that you did something to the guest. What did you do? Nothing, I didn't do anything. Yes, you did. What did you do? And the chief goes and he takes the bone out from his cheek and he throws it into the river and returns it to the little boy so that he could fully form. And the little boy came back all into one piece, and he comes up to the river, and the mother takes him in his arms. And the teaching is that, what is this word? We are all one? It's not so must. We are all one. That the fish is our cousin, is our brother, our little brother. It's the mother's son, that they are our family, and that we need to care for them and gently put the bones to the side. We gently carry them to the river. We return them to the river so that we take care of the cycle so that the salmon will return to us year after year after year. And these were our teachings of how to take care of the salmon, how to take care of the land. And also in the teaching of like I would have to go over it again too, but there's one little section too of like the humpback salmon and how they were like canoeing and they would pass the humpback people, and the humpback salmon like had big humps on their back, and they would wave from the island of the humpback salmon. So it's like the knowledge that's ingrained in our stories is that's our teachings, that's our knowledge. So I mean, just going back, I believe that your question was about the Stalo, the river, and those teachings, but that stayed, that it's so ingrained in us, like we are salmon people. And so understanding that like I'm half salmon,
I'm hungry now.
Like understanding that I'm half salmon too. I was like, oh my God, I totally am half salmon. And there was something else I was going to say about that. I can't remember now. I lost my train of thought. But, as far as like Michelle's nation as well too, and then incorporating stories into there too, because their story, there was a little story about a little girl falling into the river and transforming into a salmon. So it's like that's the other fun part about it as well too, is that you start to like share the stories and that there's similar stories from different nations. And then like going back to before when you said like the bringing the light and the humor to it, for me this is where the joy comes, where we're bringing that back again, where I'm like, tell me your salmon story and I'll tell you my salmon story, and the sharing that we used to do. And that we're doing it now is what I wanted to say. You know, like everybody has a wild woman story too. Like my granny used to tell us the wild woman story when we were little about the wild woman who would steal the children. So you weren't allowed to like take off to the beach or go berry picking because she'll come and she'll get you. And she had a basket, and she would throw the kids in the basket, and then she would take them up to her cave in the mountains, and she would put cedar pitch on their eyes to close their eyes up. So it's like you tell this story about the wild woman who steals the children, and it's like, what's your story? You know, like everyone has a wild woman story too.
Thank you.
My granny used to scare me with that one. Do you tell that to your kids? Do you?
Yeah, even the kids at the park, like across the street from the park. I have 3 little kids, and when they don't come in at night, I'm like, come on, guys, come on. And then, like, some of their friends are older, and they're allowed to stay out. And I'm like, you guys better come in, or Quelemia is going to come get you. That's not true. That's not true. I'm like, yes, it is. It is. Go ask your mom. Go ask your mom. And they come back, Auntie, it's true. Told you.
We're kind of coming to the end of our time. So how would you like to bring this in?
What?
With the story?
We're just getting started.
Yeah.
Thought we were being
I know we didn't even get to place names. I feel like I'm just going to say every place name that I know right now so that everybody can know.
Okay, let's go.
Go.
first.
Let's just name them. Shrupapiak,
Hoi Hoi,
Snok,
Stlitsis,
Sesnom.
Sanok.
I said Snok.
Oh, sorry. Callahan.
Mequim. Oh my
Where
God,
do
this
I
is
live?
the funnest game.
Stileth.
Okay, Chathus.
Malay.
Well, yeah, Malay. That's a good one. Oh my God.
Tum tum tumok. No, just kidding. There's so many places. Huai Hui. Yeah, I said that first.
I just said Shupapiak.
Oh, okay.
Did you say Hawaii?
Yeah, I said Huai Hui.
Oh, you did. Okay. That was fun.
Yeah, that was fun. We have so many new things we just invented tonight.
we did. We should play this game more often.
Right?
Anyway.
Intellectual property. No, just kidding.
I just think it's really important everywhere I go just to like share more place names so that people get used to hearing them and knowing the place names. Did I tell you that? Well, I told you that one time where I did a land acknowledgement and I flubbed up the place name. For some reason, I like said the wrong place name. I must have been really tired. And then afterwards, I knew it as soon as it happened. And I was like, oh God. And I couldn't go back and change it. And then I got off stage and I realized it had happened. But like a white person came up to me that I knew and was like, didn't you mean blah, blah, blah? And I was like, oh, yeah, I totally screwed that up.
I was testing your knowledge.
But
making
that's
sure
what
you're
was
listening to the people.
right? Totally. But like that's what I thought was so amazing, is it like it's catching on. Like a decade ago, no, that wouldn't have happened. But now it's happening where that information is sticking and it's becoming part of all of us. That this white person came up to me and was like, no, you said the wrong place name. I was like, thank God. Like to me, that was like a message and a sign that like, that we all are more part of this land, that we understand it, that we're connected to it, that we know the place names more, that the work is actually working. You know, like, because sometimes it feels like work. And again, I just want to go back to like bringing the joy back into it, that it's a joyous thing. And that when something like that happens, it's like, oh, thank God, like somebody's listening.
I think it's also the time we live into. Like I always talk about this too. Like it's like a generational thing. Like we're pretty fortunate. Like even though I'm still a 550-888-701. Still belong to the Queen. We have the ability to stand up and use our voice. Like we can stand up and be proud and teach people, and they're listening now, you know, without like us just being like a sideshow or a, you know, a check. Oh, yeah, got a land acknowledgement. All right, we're good. Let's go. You know, like it's a really good time to be who we are, and I'm just really thankful that my kids could, how do I say it, experience it without all that extra on top of it. Like, my kids are still trying to understand, like, like sometimes, like when I'm joking, like say when we're driving, like when I'm driving in the car with my cousin, and instead of having road rage or something, I'd be like, beep, beep, excuse me, hey, this is our land, excuse me, like, you know, just like saying something cheeky, right, putting humor into it, but then my kids will be like, get off our land. I'm like, no, not like that. Hold on. But they're getting it, and I'm so thankful that they have that power within them, that strength and that power. Without, like for me growing up, I always had to kind of question myself or watch myself or like kind of judge, you know, what am I getting into? Whereas my kids are little warriors and they're like, I don't care. So yeah, I'm just really thankful for this time, for these teachings, for our ancestors and for our future generations, because it's a pretty amazing thing that's happening. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, Tsepka.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you. Thank you to everyone in the audience. Thank you to Rosemary and to Donna. I can't even see where you are, Donna. Where are you? Oh, way up there. I'm like, can't really see anything. To Alistair, he's making us blind.
Oh, that's my son's name, by the way, Alistair. Alistair Jericho.
To our tech team. To April, who is here. I think there's a really beautiful place. Thank you for your stories. And I think there's a really beautiful thing on, for me, I know for me as an Indigenous person, as I travel to other people's territories, there's a really important piece for me of learning hearing the words of the places, because I come across with, in the colonial lens that this is welcome to Vancouver. I mean, it's not Vancouver, I know that, because from coast to coast to coast, it's 100% Indigenous, Inuit, and, all of us, we all live here and have lived here for thousands of years. But there's a place of the stories, when I look at the stories and the landscape changes from, in contextually, that opens up the worlds, that that language that comes from a language that's older than words, right? And so beautiful to hear you speak, both of you, to your language and to bring that into this room. Your ancestors are like, yeah, ooh, yeah, all at once. And
No, they're like, oh, that's an interesting accent.
right? Yeah. Yeah, so thank you everyone for coming tonight.
And there they are.
Yeah. Accept that.
Thank you.